prediction markets and say I would buy a bet on next year's outcome of the weather forecast. And you would bet on that, right? And based on the decision, based on the actual outcome, which is easily verifiable through, after the fact, you would basically get a payout. And that payout is essentially your insurance for your next year's weather condition. Election prediction, enterprise forecasting. I think Hewlett Packard did an interesting experiment using to project their printer sales in the public markets to let people guess how much they would sell their printer. Supposedly, their experts' internal team should have so much more data than public in terms of their printer projection, but apparently, actually, they were beaten completely by the prediction market results. So enterprise is another interesting stuff. One specific use case that I'm personally really excited about is traditionally you had the VC model. You have a group of experts of 10, 20 people trying to predict what's the next Facebook. Now, can we handle that result instead by the prediction markets? So you would have the public to bet on it. That's a really, I think, interesting case that may just shift the traditional 1 to 10 or 1 to 20 unicorn ratio, 1 to 100 unicorn ratio to something significantly lower. That's really powerful. Price discovery. So you could, if you don't know exactly how to price a new service, you could use that as an interesting way. And finally, you have public goods. So even if that betting really itself is nothing, you could really just create an interesting bet, but you charge a big transaction fee. You take that transaction fee just like a lottery model, and you fund something that is actually more meaningful and good. There are a lot of good use cases. In their cases, they use two really big dependencies, but interesting dependency. One is sidechain, the other is Ethereum. The reason there is Ethereum is pretty understandable. They need smart contracts, complex smart contracts to create all these bets. On the other side, they also use sidechain. Sidechain in this example, in their case, I think played a role of stabilization. Because when you think about when you put a bet into something, you want the currency itself to be stable, right? You don't want it to bet both on rely on the uncertainty of the presidential election and plus the uncertainty of Bitcoin, right? That's pretty horrible. So you could have won the bet and you still lose the money on the actual currency. So that's why they kind of wanted to have a pegging mechanism into the sidechain.
So the sidechain was from Bitcoin to Ethereum, or?
To their own chain. I think they have a fork of their own Ethereum chain.
So Ethereum to their.
Right, and they use something called stablecoin mechanism, where you have two classes of you have the shares, but you also have the coins. And think of a decentralized central bank. The central bank's job is basically to add money supply or contract money supply, and that's exactly what they're going to do. So they will have a self-regulation of monitoring the market price on the Bitcoin exchange and see, okay, Bitcoin exchange drops, and therefore we should buy back more. Or if the prices increase to a certain point, we should again issue more money supply. So they basically need a sidechain or hold certain reserves of something of value. So so that's Augur. Now I'm going to spend too much time on that. So, and lastly about Koinify. So I think that's looking at all these examples. I think there's a lot of exciting possibilities, and basically Koinify trying to be the marketplace for these gaps. So we have primarily, I think current service is crowdfunding, but I think that's the larger vision is really to be a marketplace where you can discover and find and purchase these interesting gaps. So just to recap everything, that's something that I think we will likely use in the next classes. So, what's that?
Can you close your hand?
Yes, I'm trying to find how to close that. So we talked about the MVC layer, different layers of MVC. You could basically start from the top, the view. The view hasn't really changed much. In terms of the crypto toolkits, I think we're really talking about the bridges, the APIs that will allow a web application easily to talk to the chain, right? And so far you have Eris, which actually have something called D-server that you're going to learn more this afternoon. It allows you to write in Node or JavaScript that actually allows you to talk to the chain. And that chain could be something of choice, your own choice. It could be a blockchain, it could be Ethereum chain, and etc. The other really interesting one that I'd like to mention is ZeroNet. So ZeroNet is basically, instead of hosting a traditional Apache or Nginx type of server that is typical server client, they actually host your web content just like what BitTorrent would do. So when you hit the web server, you're really hitting one of the nodes within the distributed network. So I think I would consider another decentralized kind of view that's really interesting. The other two parts is notarization and tokenization. I separated them out because some provides both, some provide only one. So counterparty is a classic example of tokenization. They provide mostly really just tokenization of anything, but it's the ledger, it's a trusted ledger. Factum, on contrary, is a little more broad, and they provide both. You can notarize land records, insurances, mortgage, loans, etc., but you can also create certain tokens, because token is really a subset of notarization, basically. And then you have Ethereum that does basically everything, right? So which is really ambitious and cool stuff. And also on the notarization side, you have a more specialized notarization, which is any type of blockchain, starting with Bitcoin, but NXT, etc. Basically, they are usually some kind of either very specialized or more generalized notarization. You also, and then down the layer, you have programmable logic. Smart contract, or whatever you want to call it, is basically something that allows you to customize and write your own way of the controller for the chain, for the consensus layer. So Eris, again, is a full stack that covers most of that, and I think Codius would stand in program logic as well. Ethereum obviously would cross that as well. I'm not quite aware of other examples yet, but I think these are the three main ones. And Eris obviously is actually forks Ethereum. So, and Counterparty actually also forks Ethereum, so I should have put this box as well, covered for logic. And the last part, which another exciting area is file storage, is, okay, so you got this chain, but most of the chain are really expensive because they're replicated everywhere, right? How do you store a large amount of data but still have the reliability of distributed systems so that you depend on a central party? A couple pretty promising projects. IPFS definitely on top of my list, and then you have things like MadeSafe, which has had this famous raise of $6 million last year, and then you have Tahoe, LFS, and then you also have Storage, maybe more there. So these I would kind of summarize as the toolbox to construct any type of decentralized application. You may use one or you may use multiple of them. And that's, I think, the requirement that I would ask you guys to think about. How would you use one or more of these toolkits? So lastly, I just wanted to call out our final demo day. So we did have a really interesting demo day for Module 1. So now Module 2, you got a lot more toolkits. I also want to encourage everyone to be even more bolder, to have a decentralized application. So I'm going to ask you to finalize your project proposals and your team structure by next week. So next week we're not going to have a class, so you can celebrate your Valentine's Day, but I'd like to ask you all to submit the proposals, and we'll have a demo day by March 7th for internal. And then we'll just pick the winners from both that pool as well as the first batch. So we have a combined public demo night on March 10th. And the requirement is really just to use one or more of the distributed toolkits, file systems, smart contract, notarization, tokenization, or really any type of blockchain. So, all right. So any questions before we move on to the next? I think we'll probably have a lunch break, right? Yeah. Any questions?
Are you going to share the slides?
Yes, well, sure.
Have you dealt with, I guess, or have you thought about different ways of dealing with how outside market forces can change underlying assumptions within a smart contract? And I guess kind of it seems like one of the limitations that may occur in a decentralized automated corporation, and one of the main reasons we do like M&A due diligence and underlying like value assumptions.
So can you clarify like the external, what kind of condition change? Can you give an example?
Well, I guess there are assets that change in value, and they may change in value in an unanticipated manner, based on, I guess, new innovations in something. You may have a certain asset, but that asset is now not worth what it used to be or what you would expect it to be because of some outside competitor or something like that.
Sure.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so I think the question is, if I understand correctly, is how does a smart contract or on-chain code can be aware of and adapt to external condition changes, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain things like consensus, the people who have bought into it agree to change a certain aspect, but I guess how often does that have to occur and what other tools are available?
Right, so I think there's a different type of assumption that could change, classic assumptions. One type of assumption is a known changes, or it's a known uncertainty. And that known uncertainty is something, for example, like let's say you have a hedging contract, and you depending on knowing the price of Bitcoin in the external world that is not known to the chain. So that's the first type of thing, and that usually comes to the concept of oracles. You have different solves. That kind of one is something like Reality Keys is doing. Basically, they try to have multiple parties submitting data feeds that says, okay, so I collect data from 10 different Bitcoin exchanges, and I assume that the 10 exchanges together to collude is pretty hard, and therefore I would safely trust so long as 8 or more of the exchanges come to an agreement on the Bitcoin price, or maybe I'll just use a median or average prices, and to guess what would be possible that. And then you have something like shelling coin idea. I encourage all of you to read that blog post. But the idea is simple. It's basically, if you think about, I think the original assumption is you put, let's say, 100 prisoners and you put, or suspects, and you put in different rooms and ask the same question, and assuming, and tell them that if you guys does not say the same answer, we're going to punish you more. Right? So everybody has the incentive, without knowing the other people, you have an incentive to say the right answer. And that's kind of the mechanism, basically, you try to acquire external data feed, especially on something that is rather objective, like pricing, or like what's the weather for yesterday, right? Something of objective nature. So, but I think it's still a largely unsolved problem. A lot of things that are just really, really hard to prove, and that's why it kind of limits the application of blockchain services today. Any other questions?
So you had two full stacks over there, but you said one was a fork. So essentially, if you use Eris, you're also using Ethereum?
Yeah, like something like Eris. I think the beauty of Eris is when you got the services about everything in one kind of JavaScript basically package. So that's kind of make it a lot easier.
Well, and so, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you guys want more details, but Counterparty didn't fork Ethereum; they're just using some of the language.
Yeah, they provide a serpent basically, a scripting language part.
Yeah, and Eris, I think the idea is that they may eventually come back and put some of their stuff on top of Ethereum.
Yeah. Well, Eris isn't. I wouldn't consider Eris that way. I think Eris is more an integration of the full stack. They forked Ethereum, so they have the scripting part, contract part. They also provide integration to IPFS as their first module, and then they have the D server, which kind of connects everything together. So I think it's more an integration toolkit rather than a full implementation or re-implementation.
Yeah, but the question is, would they continue to use their own fork of the blockchain, or come back to use Ethereum at some point in the
You
future?
mean writing data onto the public Ethereum chain?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a question for these guys.
Yeah, my understanding was that they would at least strongly consider coming back to the Ethereum chain.
Possible, yeah. All right, cool. Thanks. So maybe let's take a lunch break to 1 o'clock, 1 p.m.
Sound good? 1 p.m.?
All right, sounds good.
And Arif Nazar from Block.io is back in the house, so discuss any project ideas with him if you'd like. And a big round of applause to Tom Ding of Koinify.